Welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari. This is Great Big History Podcast, and in this episode we do the exploration, genocide, slavery, and transformation of the Americas, also known as the discovery of the New World. Why? Why do we need to discover the New World? Well, the thing we've been talking about for the last couple episodes has been the destruction of the Silk Road. The Silk Road has been the traditional economic route connecting the world, from eastern China and northern India across Central Asia into the Middle East and to Europe. This trade route has existed since the Han and the Mauryans kind of built it around 100 or so AD. And with the destruction of it by the Mongol Civil Wars, the Ming turning inward, suddenly European trade, if you want to trade with China and India, has to go by sea. So the question is, who is going to get it? Well, Portugal is at the edge of the Atlantic. It has peace by the 1450s. It's poor, so it needs the money. Spain is in the middle of the Reconquista. It's busy. Britain is poor and has civil wars. France is rich. It could afford to send navies out to India or China, but the landed elites don't need the cash. They're not paying taxes, and that's going to be a big deal when we hit the French Revolution. They don't really engage in the trade. There's a weak king, so there's no real desire to send out fleets to try to get to China or India. Italy, likewise, is rich. It's skilled, but its skill is in the Mediterranean. It's not in going over the oceans. Italy has also dominated the Silk Road trade, and so why would it change? There is some TV show, some movie I watched, it might have been The West Wing, that had a quote, "Do you know what the hardest thing for a coach to do in the Super Bowl? Is change the plays that had got them to the Super Bowl." And that's the Italians. The Italians had dominated the trade since the Crusades. So for about 400 years, they got rich. They created the Renaissance. And so why would you suddenly build ocean-going ships to try to get around Africa and get to Italy or China? So the idea was, keep trying to dominate what you got. What about Germany and Scandinavia? Well, they have ocean-going vessels, the old long and dragon boats of the Viking Age. So they could build an ocean-going vessel. It's not much of a trade vessel, but it could be used. But Germany and Scandinavia were a mess. There's weak kings. There's powerful lords. In the end, there's no desire. Go all the way to China? Why? The Middle East is far enough. Italy is far enough. There's no unified part in Germany or Scandinavia that can head out, that had the money, that had the desire, that had the power. So it's kind of one of the great questions is why Portugal? And it's, well, who else? No one else was in a position in the 1450s to try to set out for China or India. So in the 1450s, Portugal starts to head south around Africa. And what they do is start rest stops along the way. And that allows for African trade. See, they're trying to get around Africa, but you can't do it in one giant shot. You need to know the tides and the seas and the currents and the winds. And so they go a little bit, they map it, they chart it, they get the data, and they stop. And they meet coastal Africans who are going to play a big role in this. And the coastal Africans are there, and they say, "Hey, would you like to trade?" And the Europeans say, "Yeah, well, actually, come to think of it, we need food, we need water, we need all kinds of stuff." And, well, what's that stuff you have? "Oh, well, that's ivory. It comes from animals. We carve it up, make nice art. Hey, we'll buy some of that." "Oh, what's this?" "Oh, it's a fruit that you probably don't have in Europe." "Oh, well, we'll take some of that." And suddenly even though they're on the way to India and then to China, there's this idea of, well, we'll make money off the African trade along the way. We'll go a little bit, stop, buy some stuff, go back, make a profit. So the Portuguese are already making a profit on the exotic trade and the relationships they're having with coastal Africans. In 1497, Vasco da Gama and his ships rounds the Cape of Good Hope, around what will become South Africa, goes up the east coast of Africa, the Arab Islamic parts of East Africa, and then jumps across the Arabian Sea to India. They buy the silks, they buy the spices, they buy the teas, they buy the opium, they buy the stuff of India. They come back and they make a 3,000% profit. Now, to put that into perspective, the modern Wall Street stock market, you can expect to make 7%. If you make 7%, you're doing great. There's an old banker joke, right? It was take the money in at 3. So give people 3%. Take the money in at 3, loan it out at 6, be on the golf course by 3. The 3-6-3 rule. Take it in at 3, loan it out at 6, be on the golf course by 3. Because banking and finance was not a big deal for until the 1980s. And so banks were happy making 6%. If you read your great Jane Austen books, Charles Dickens books, the books of the 19th century, where you have really rich people, those people, a lot of them are making money off bonds from the Bank of England, paying 6 to 8%. And they got to have a castle on 6%. So today, if you're making 7% on the stock market, you're doing great. Hedge funds promise more than that. So if you're rich and you could get into a hedge fund, you can make 10 to 15% on average. This is always averages. Some years are higher, some years are lower, but on averages. Bernie Madoff stole billions of dollars from rich people, promising 20%, an unheard of 20%. What would people do for 3,000%? For 3,000%, we are going to change the world. We are going to enslave and depopulate large parts of Africa. We're going to commit genocide in the Americas and then repopulate it with new peoples. We're going to take excess population from Europe and ship it over to North and South America. We're going to obliterate the kingdoms in South Asia and East Asia. We're going to take over their economies. We're going to change time itself. For 3,000% profits, Europeans are going to change the world. Why? Because it's so enormous. There's nothing like it before. Just simply nothing. Short of plundering Carthage or Alexander plundering Persia, there is no example in European history of the amount of money that comes flooding in from this. And it's easy. You don't have to go to war. You don't have any of those complications. And so kings start investing to make money. Why would the kings invest? Because they're not stupid. They see this money, 3,000% profits, as independence from their parliaments and their lords. See, every time you go to your lords to ask for money, because being a king is expensive, you owe your reputational rich, your power rich, but you're always financially poor. Lots of people need money from you. You got to build bridges. You got to build roads. You got to fight with the Scots. There's always issues going on. A church needs this. A university needs that. Money is always flowing out of your king because you want people to like you. The easiest way to make people like you is to give them money for the stuff they need. And so you need more money. But the problem is you need to get money from other people. There's no banks. And so that's the parliament. That's the lords. You go to your lords, who are the other rich guys in your society, and you say, can I have some money? And they always, always, always say yes. But, yes, of course, Mr. King, you can have money. But, and they want something for it. Sometimes it's little things. Jobs for my homeboys. Sometimes it's big things. A veto power on all spending from now on. Because we don't like the way you spend your money. Depends on how desperate the king is for the stuff he needs. This international trade was the king's domain. He owned it. He invested in the ships. Many of them were royal ships anyway from the Navy. He hired soldiers. Everybody was essentially not working for the king, but the king was the largest investor in Columbus. Actually, that's the queen, that's Isabella. But in any of these great age of explorations, it's the king who's the number one promoter, the number one investor. And so the Portuguese king is suddenly 3,000% richer. Every other king notices that, and they want in on this as well, because it gives them independence from their parliaments and their lords. Now they don't have to ask permission. The problem is this is so expensive that even the king can't afford everything all the time, and so corporations start forming. This is to diversify risk, share the profits. More people want in. 3,000% profit, lots of people will donate money. The problem is most people don't have a lot of money, and if a ship goes down, you lose that money. And it's very risky. You don't know who the captain is. You don't know where they're going. You don't know. They'll be gone 3 years. And so what a corporation does is diversify the risk. I will give you 1% of your need. You give me 1% of your profit. I can afford that. It's not that big of a risk. And whatever the profit is, I get 1%. So the corporations reward wealth, because the bigger your percentage is, the bigger your share of the profits. But it also diversifies the risk so more people can get involved. So you get more corporations create more trade. So this is what Portugal is doing. What about Spain? Well, in 1492, Spain ends the Reconquista. It wins the Reconquista. The Reconquista is the Catholic reconquest of Spain. And it wins it. It conquers Granada, the last Muslim holdout, last Muslim fortification in Spain. And so Spain becomes a Catholic Christian European country for the first time since the Roman era, but it becomes a European country really from the first time since the 700s. Okay, so now the Queen Isabella has money. There's Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. King Ferdinand is in Aragon. He really doesn't matter. I know there are some Aragon, fanboys out there who will be like, but Isabella owned Castile. She was the Queen of Castile, the richest, the biggest part. She was the mover and shaker. If she said no to Columbus, there is no Columbus. She is the mover and the shaker until her death, because Castile is the more important part of Spain. Now, there's a problem. She's got money. That's good. But she's now finished a war, so there's ex-soldiers and these crusaders. The Reconquista was a crusade. So these are guys who are all hopped up on war. They like conquering the infidel. And there's a big hey, let's go attack them in Morocco, which is a bit crazier because Morocco has been non-European since the Roman era. It's been Islamic since the 600s. There's more people there. There's more, Muslims there. It's a way harder thing, but they're crusaders. They want a war. The ex-soldiers want pay, so they need a war. And Spain, seeing the money Portugal's bringing in, needs a way of catching up. Now, they see this money coming in from the African trade. They want to catch up. But if they head south, they're 50 years behind. They will never catch up to Portugal in the race to get to India or China. And China's the big goal. It's nice Vasco da Gama will get to India, but China is the big goal. If you could get to China first, you will make enormous profits. And so Columbus says, I have a shortcut. We'll head west. What happens is they run into the American civilizations. There's no spices. There's none of the stuff they're looking for in India or China, but there's lots of gold. And all you have to do is kill the people. If you kill the Aztecs, you get their gold. If you kill the Incas, you get their gold. And the conquistadors are crusaders. They're ex-soldiers. So they're perfectly happy killing non-Christian, non-Catholic foreigners. This is what they do. So killing these people, taking their gold. So Cortez, after conquering the Aztecs, is the richest man in Spain. But also, remember, he takes all this money in, right? They divide it up between the 1,000 or so Spaniards. They divide this money up, right? The king gets 20%. They all take their money, and they take 20%. Each person takes 20%, puts it to the side, and that's the king's share. And you have to remember this. They are not duplicitous. They are down to the penny honest. And you may go, how would the king know? The king doesn't have any agents. This is the far side of the world. Well, it's the same reason why there's honor with thieves. There's honor with mobsters, with gangsters. The king gets his cut, because if he doesn't, or she doesn't if she's the queen, then your freedom can end. Cortez does not want a royal fleet showing up full of Marines looking for him. That is the quickest way to lose all your money. And more important, lose your freedom to conquer more people and get more money. So you always pay that 20%. Always. And that's going to be a big deal as we go along. So the king's getting this 20% for literally doing nothing. For just letting ex-soldiers and conquistadors go to the New World and just be crazy. Just do what you do and they get a check in the mail. They get 20%. Boop. And the king goes, and it's, thank you, king, for letting me, this is my thank you, gold, for letting me be me. And the king says, great. Why would I want to kill the golden goose? Why would I get involved in this? Let them rape, murder, pillage. I get my 20%. But then there's a new discovery. More than Aztec or Peruvian gold or silver, which will be very, very important. There's a gold mine that's not gold, and that is sugar. So much money is made out of sugar. I cannot underestimate it. I cannot in any way, shape, or form not give it quintuple exclamation points. Sugar, sugar, sugar. Gold and silver get a lot of the play in textbooks and in high school, but it's sugar. That is the entire reason America exists as a place. Because the conquistadors don't want to stay. The conquistadors steal all the money that's easy to find, and then they're like, I'm going home. I'm going back to Spain. I want to be a lord. There's not a lot of desire to stay in the Americas. That's not where any of these guys want to do. These are not poor guys. These are ex-soldiers who got rich, and they're heading back to Europe. They don't want to stay in this heat with the yellow fever and the malaria and the no European women. They want to go home. Sugar is what makes them stay. Sugar is what's going to bring people. Sugar is the reason to murder the Indians and enslave the Africans. It is sugar that changes everything. Because the demand for sugar it's simply a drug. It is heroin, but legal. You cannot underestimate just how much sugar makes. By 1750, it is bigger than grain or rice in world trade. That's important because grain and rice is what you ate every day. And sugar is much more profitable. It's a much bigger product. Liquefaction of sugar allowed you to put tons of it into barrels and ship it. Think molasses, think rum, liquor. This is almost pure sugar. But it's liquefied. We do it in class, right? We took out a Coke or a Dr. Pepper, and it's how many teaspoons of sugar are suspended in that liquid. Right? A Snapple has 40 grams of sugar. How many teaspoons is that? About 15. 15 teaspoons. So sugar is a giant bulk product. It's hard to ship. It takes up a lot of space. There's a lot of air between those crystals. But you liquefy it down. You suspend it in a liquid. And now you could put tons of it into barrels. And you could put barrel on top of barrel on top of barrel. And suddenly the Spanish galleons are carrying hundreds of tons of liquefied sugar in the form of rum, in the form of molasses, that once you get to Spain, you could reconvert back into sugar and use it in all kinds of different ways. So you get huge shipping profits. Your profits per ton is enormous. But there's a problem. Sugar and later tobacco in North America requires an infrastructure of scale. That requires a plantation. A farmer doesn't matter. Your 40 acres and your mule doesn't matter. And there's a reason, let me just put this in the hashtag in a little bracket. There's a reason why the old saying was 40 acres and a mule for ex-slaves, for freedmen. That they wanted their 40 acres and a mule. Why? Because with a horse, with a mule, with a dog, you could only plow about 40 acres. In the ancient world, you could do about 15 to 20 acres. In the Greek world, in the Roman world, you're talking 15 to 20 acres. And that was enough to feed yourself. So you could see how farmers in the early modern age, in the 1860s, were richer than ancient world farmers, but not by much. But there was no point in owning 500 acres if you were just a farmer, because you couldn't plow it. Now, you might use a 3-field system and all that, and so you wanted to have more acreage in order to not exhaust your land. That's nice. But you could only really plow about 40 acres, which is all you needed for food and a little bit of extra savings. That doesn't make you anything in sugar. You won't make anything. Growing sugarcane, way too hard. Way too hard to work. It's not worth it. So to make money from sugar, you need 1,000 acres, 5,000 acres, the old plantations of the Roman system. Large farms, and then you need lots of workers, because one, you're not going to work. You're the owner of a plantation. You're not working. You have to oversee. You're now the owner of the fields. You're overseeing the work. So this requires money to buy all the land. You need money for storage, for sugar in its dry form. You need labor to cut down the sugar cane and then grind it up. You need a liquefaction process, which means you need a kiln. You need heat and liquid to turn it into a liquid form, which means you need a lot of equipment. That equipment needs people to know how to use it, which means you need education. Then you have to do something with all of that liquefied sugar, which means you need barrels. You have to put it in a barrel, and then you need the shipping to ship it to market in the old world, in Portugal, Spain, England, or France, in order to make any money. Nobody has that money. Nobody has the money for all of that. So from the very beginning, sugar forces the economies of Portugal, Spain, France, Britain to change and to become banking and companies, and a way of securing money that you can then use for investments. So now banks are not loaning money out to governments anymore. They're loaning it out to sugar cane plantations to companies that own several sugarcane plantations, or the companies that own the shipping for the sugar plantations. And now you get a scaling up of investment because there's so much money to be made. The banks can make the argument to rich people, give us money, I'm going to make you a lot more money. So the rich people say, yeah, here's my $20,000. Great. The bank takes $20,000 from 100 noble people, puts it together, then loans it out to companies at 7 to 10%. Those companies then use it to build shipping and infrastructure and equipment and liquefaction and all that. And they do it on a bigger scale, because the bigger your scale, the more money you can make. This is basic macroeconomics 101. But there's a problem. So now you got the money. The problem is that the work is super, super hard. And it's hot. And if you've ever been to Disney World in August, you know how hot Florida gets. Now keep going south. European conquistador lords did not want to do this work. It was too hard. It was too hot. So they need workers. And so what they do is turn to the peasants. They turn to the Native Americans to turn them into peasants. They say, here are the Native Americans. We'll make them peasants. That means violence. Why? Well, because the Native Americans are not European peasants. European peasants have learned to be European peasants since the end of the Roman Empire. Right? They were Roman citizens, so they were a bit different in the Roman era. But the late Roman Empire into the early Dark Ages, the early Middle Ages, was a profound period of violence where people changed into peasants, where you had a lord who owned a manor, who had peasants working for him. They were free. They were Christians. They paid taxes, essentially. They paid, a tax to work the land, for the right to work the land. In exchange, they got protections. Now, we'll see this when we talk about Hobbes later. But the idea was, it was a system that by this point is roughly 1,000 years old. And if the peasants get mad, they could revolt against their lord, and there'll be a revolution or a small thing. And sometimes that spreads. If you've ever watched Braveheart, it could spread from the one person or the one manor to the entire region, and sometimes it spreads from the region into the entire nation. And that brings in problems. So, like, the king doesn't care about one nobleman having a problem with his peasants. The king cares when a region rises up or multiple regions rises up. Now it's his problem. So this is violence. To turn the Native Americans into peasants is to commit violence against them, because the Native Americans are like, this is not how we live. And now the Europeans are like, you're going to work my land for me. And in exchange, you become a Christian and you make a little bit of profit on what you farm. You get to keep some of the food you farm on the side. And the Native Americans are like, that's not how we live. And so this, you want to make an omelet, you break eggs. And that's the attitude of the Europeans against the Native Americans, to turn them into workers for these sugar plantations. All right. So already we have a lot of violence in the New World. We have the violence of the conquistadors conquering to take gold. Now we have the violence of the plantation conquistador lord to turn the Native Americans into workers so that that lord can make a lot of money on sugar. All right? This is not a nice system, but we've seen it before. It's well historical. It's well within the bounds of not ethics, but European tradition. Nothing here is new. It's not nice, and there's plenty of people who hold their nose about it, and there's plenty of people who are perfectly happy being violent about it. But this is well within the historical tradition that people in 1550 understand. But, and it's a massive but, The massive but is the Native Americans, the indigenous population, die. And they die at 95%. They die at extinction level rates. They die at such a rate that there is no more Caribs in the Caribbean. They die at such a rate that when the Puritans show up at Massachusetts Bay, they think God gave them an empty land because there's no people on it. Well, there were people on it. 50 years earlier, there were people on it. There might have been 100 million people in the New World. There's 25 million people in Mexico alone. Peru is probably just as big. The Incan kingdom is probably almost as large as Mexico. So you're easily talking 50 to 75 million people throughout the New World when white people show up. But what they brought was their old world diseases, their cough, their whooping cough, their scarlet fever, their colds, their flus. Now, for the most part, a lot of those diseases didn't kill Europeans, Africans, Middle Easterners, or Asians. It killed them at the rate the flu kills people today. A constant shame, but most people will survive it. Did people die young? Yes, in the old world. But these diseases, a lot of their bodies, their immune systems had experience with. Because they spread year after year, like the flu does today, year after year, year after year. They followed the trade routes, and so they spread. Every once in a while, there was a completely new disease that would run through people, the Black Death, for example, and just 25% of the population would die. This happened in the 600s, just as the Byzantine Empire was just as Justinian was putting together the Roman Empire, a plague, again out of China, followed the trade routes and just obliterated 25 to 30% of the population of the Byzantine world. And all of a sudden, he went from reconquering the Roman Empire to not. The entire history of the European, Middle Eastern world changed because of that plague. And that's not the Great Plague. That's not the Black Death. That's a plague in the 600s that doesn't really have a name. I don't know. It's just a plague. In the New World, the peoples of the New World have been separated from the people of the Old World by about 15,000 years when the last ice age ended. So their immune systems were tuned to New World diseases. And there's an argument, there are a couple books out that say that people didn't really get sick in the New World. And the reason why they make this argument is a lot of, and if you're following the coronavirus or the bird flu or SARS, a lot of diseases that people get come from animals. AIDS, for example, started in monkeys. And people ate the monkeys and it crossed over. People ate something in western southern China, and now they have a coronavirus. And that coronavirus is now burning through people. The people of the New World, of the Americas, didn't have domesticated animals. They didn't have animals for food like pigs and cows, sheep and goats. So they didn't have the same experience with animal diseases. Now, they still ate animals. So I don't know how good that argument is. They still ate bushmeat. They still ate birds. So I don't know how good that argument is. But the truth is that the immunities between the two peoples, between the Old World, Europe, Africa, and Asia, and the Americas, were separated by 15,000 years. They completely separated differently. So when the Old World people showed up in the New World, they had a 15,000 year head start, or just not even a head start. They're just a different branch of diseases. So when they show up, the diseases, the bodies of the New World, of natives in the New World, indigenous peoples, had no experience with any of these diseases. So their bodies couldn't handle any of them. The common cold, dead. Flu, dead. Because the body just collapsed. Because it was like Godzilla versus Bambi. The old world diseases just wreaked havoc, just burned through everybody. And you're talking dinosaur level extinction. This is another, if I can't underestimate the amount of money made from sugar, nor can I underestimate the death of the natives. 95%. It's dinosaur level extinction. It might be higher than dinosaur level extinction because the dinosaurs, those that survived, evolved into birds, for example, or other things. The Native Americans don't really, those who will survive will either stay completely as natives or become married into Spanish, Portuguese families and become mulattoes. But they're gone. North America is seen as empty when the British show up. It wasn't. Now, I have students who also say, well, what diseases did the New World people give to the Spanish? And they gave, one is a type of malaria and yellow fever, which the people didn't give them, the mosquitoes did. The number one killer of old world people coming to the New World was mosquitoes. The second thing was syphilis. That's the argument. Syphilis, the sex disease. Maybe some other things, but syphilis, which was described as the pox. Now, you'll hear a lot about smallpox. Well, a pox is this oozing sore on your body. And so smallpox is small. Whereas the pox is big, these big open sores. The Spanish called it the French disease. The French called it the Spanish disease because in Italy, each side was having sex with the prostitutes. And so the Spanish brought the disease back to Spain. Then the soldiers went to Italy. They had sex with the Italian prostitutes. They got kicked out of Italy by the French, King Charles and the French. And then those French soldiers had sex with Italian prostitutes. And then they brought this disease back to France. So people called it the French disease. The French called it the Spanish disease. But what was it? It was the first well-known sexually transmitted disease. That killed you. That's the thing. Syphilis in its first 100 years killed people. Kind of like AIDS. It just burned right through people's bodies. Just burned right through them. You found out you had it, and within like a month you were dead. The bodies will change, the disease will change, so that now you could have syphilis a very long time and not even know it. It now rots your brain. Before it murdered you long before it got into your brain. Now it rots your brain. It will be easily cured with penicillin. That will be one of the great discoveries of penicillin. But syphilis becomes the great sexually transmitted disease for the next 500 years. The response to the death of the Native Americans, of the indigenous peoples, is not to stop sugar, and it's not to give up on New World trade. It's not to say, oh, this isn't going to work. The response is African slavery, and that's what we'll pick up in our next episode. Thank you.